Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to Hannah and Erik Go Birding. We're a couple of bird brains looking for adventure and some birds.
I'm Hannah, and he's Erik.
Yes, I am. And we bring you this podcast to share our adventures with you and talk about random thoughts on other birding topics. Just a couple of disclaimers. We're not experts, and if we're stealing material, we hope you'll keep an open mind. But also remember that what we discuss, they're our own opinions.
And this week's episode, we'll be talking about our recent trip we took down to Key West in Cuba.
So Hannah, do you have any birding news this week?
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff this week. That Zenaida dove that was down in Miami, it's still around, even though it's August 6th. So a lot of people have gotten their fill with photographing it, but it's still hanging around as far as we know.
As far as we know, yeah. I guess we should have taken that extra drive while we were touring down before the cruise.
Yeah, to get it. We mentioned the eBird update last episode, but we wanted to give you a couple more details about it. The taxonomy update began on the 14th, and it's still continuing today, the 15th. We both got one armchair bird, which was pretty exciting, I guess. It was Mexican duck, I believe.
Yeah, even though it's kind of deviating from the AOS checklist, but eBird's doing their thing.
Yeah, they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Oh, we love it anyways. Also, if you haven't had a chance to check out the most recent American birding podcast with Nate Swick, we definitely suggest that you do. He interviewed Dr. Drew Lanham, and they talked about diversity in the birding community. And in my professional career, I've had a lot of conversations about the same thing, and that's something that Erik and I have discussed a lot during long car rides. We've talked about diversity.
Yeah, hopefully in the future we can get together with Outdoor Afro or Latino Outdoors and, try to find a way to make birding more inclusive and more representative of the communities in which it takes place in.
Yeah, exactly. And as part of this podcast, and as we become more invested in the birding community over time, we've talked a lot about this with each other, and also we've tried to talk with others about what we can do to bring birds and included to participate. And we'd like to hear what you think. What do you do, and what do you think the birders could be doing to create a more inclusive and welcoming environment to others? But possibly the most interesting news that we thought was something we also posted on Facebook the other day about the great Black Hawk sighting up in Maine. This was the second ABA record, the first being back in April down in the Rio Grande Valley.
Yeah, it was crazy. I saw some pictures online of the underwing covert pattern showing that it's the same individual that was sighted down in April. So it flew from the Rio Grande Valley all the way to Maine in the last couple of months.
That's incredible. And our friend Javi Gonzalez was the one that photographed it in the valley. Yeah. And
he saw it, and Alex
Lemereau, I want to say.
Yeah, he's the one that actually photographed it.
Okay, but that's still an incredible trek that bird took, and that we could figure out that it's the same individual. That's amazing. So, getting into our trip, we were in need of a vacation, and fortunately we live in Florida, so naturally we decided to go on a cruise.
Yeah, so we got online and started looking through the different cruises that are offered right around this time frame, kind of looking at our price range, and saw that Norwegian Cruise Lines had one coming up going to Cuba. So we booked it.
And we've cruised with Norwegian Cruise Line before, and we loved it. There's lots of activities, there's good food. This one had free booze. They do things so you don't have to sit at a table with a bunch of people that you don't know if you don't want to. There's still the option to do that. But it's a lot more open to activities. There's a lot going on, and that's kind of how we like to live.
Like Hannah mentioned, they do a freestyle type of cruising, so it's not like what a lot of people think of. Like Hannah mentioned, they do a freestyle type of cruising, so it's not like what a lot of people think of, where it's just a bunch of old people riding around on a boat. It's more exciting than that. You've got other things going on, and we've gone on cruises, a couple different cruises in the past to Mexico and a couple in the Caribbean.
I feel like cruising is
He's not kidding. Vacationing with Hannah is exhausting. It's go, nonstop the whole time. When we flew into Singapore a few years back, we arrived at midnight, and we got to the hostel just a little while after that, and then Hannah, she couldn't sleep, so at 6 o'clock we got up and just started birding, and we just ran around all day until it was still again.
Well, we had limited time to see new birds, and I paid a lot of money to see those birds, not to sleep.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
However, some of my favorite parts of the cruise was actually relaxing and going up to the top deck at night when it wasn't so bright from the lights, and just watching the stars. It's been so long since we've seen a dark sky that was a real treat for us.
Yeah, it was pretty good. But I guess some basic details on the cruise that we went on. It was a 4-day trip out of Port Canaveral,
which is just outside of Orlando.
Yeah, it was on the Norwegian Sun, which is one of their smaller ships. It's not the smallest, but it's a smaller ship. It holds about a little bit less than 2,000 guests, and it made 2 stops, one in Key West and one in Havana.
And these 2 stops were pretty much party stops for a large portion of the cruise participants.
Just drink that free booze on the ship and do the birding while we were off the ship.
Yeah, and Erik doesn't dance anyways, so we didn't do any of that.
So we boarded the ship on Monday, and I quickly opened up the eBird app to save some checklists for any possible pelagics that we might see. Left the port in Port Canaveral right around 4 o'clock. Waved goodbye to nobody. And then we were off to start drinking and eating and drinking and eating the whole afternoon until the evening. Since the next day we weren't going to arrive into Key West until it was into the afternoon.
About 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
And plus that wasn't going to be ideal birding for us anyways, but we did have a couple of target species that we were looking for at Key West.
Yeah, the white-crowned pigeon and the super elusive Antillean nighthawk.
Spoilers.
Yeah, but the white-crowned pigeon was pretty easy. eBird had it on the target species list. I think it was right around 40%. So within that county, so we were pretty confident that we'd see it.
Confident and correct. We saw the pigeon within 5 minutes of getting off the ship. So we spent the rest of the time we had at Port Exploring Town. We rented a couple of bikes, and that helped us get around town a little bit quicker.
Yeah, at first I had my doubts about renting the bikes, that maybe I felt like we'd walked so much that maybe the bikes weren't going to be useful, but I was wrong again. It was way more beneficial to have those bikes. We were able to get places way faster, and walking was too hot. Riding the bike was cool.
We took our speedy bikes down to the southernmost buoy marker, and we didn't stand in line like all of those other suckers. We just stood a few feet in front of them and took a selfie with it. So
yeah, just kind of off the side of the street, just out of the way, but positioned ourselves so you couldn't see the people standing next to it that were also taking their picture. It was ingenious.
I'm so smart. And then we went down to Hemingway's house, which everybody told us we had to go see it. It was amazing. It was a beautiful house. And we also had to go see all the 6-toed cats because we're cat people.
Yeah.
And so, and it was a really pretty house. I mean, the way it's landscaped is just gorgeous. I think it would be a pretty good migrant trap during migration. And then we headed over to Fort Zachary Taylor State Park, which was right next to the dock that our ship was at.
Yeah, and it was pretty hot when we got
right next to the dock that our ship was at.
Yeah, and it was pretty hot when we got there. There wasn't a lot of wind. I wasn't too enthused. I was sweaty like nobody's business. But as soon as we got there, Hannah looked up and she saw a couple birds flitting around in some of the Australian pines that were right at the picnic area. Jumping around, and there was also a black and white warbler right in there.
Yeah, and they didn't really seem to mind the kids screaming and all the people having fun and wandering around just underneath the trees.
Yeah, seriously. But the one bird that was pretty skittish was a few minutes later we saw an immature white-crowned pigeon. An immature white-crowned pigeon. We found it on the Fort Overlook Trail, along with some like big giant lizard.
Yeah, it was huge. We posted on iNaturalist, which told us it was a northern curly-tailed lizard, which is actually an introduced species to southern Florida.
Yeah, but just because it was kind of out of place, and like I'm not a biologist or anything, but just looking at it, it didn't look like it belonged there.
Oh, it was like 3 or 4 times bigger than what a red knoll. Yeah, pretty big guy. Anyways, like Erik said, it was hot, and we wanted to explore some of the other highlights of Key West since we had never been there.
I wanted to eat. Birding makes me hungry, and I couldn't wait for the ship's buffet.
Well, I didn't want to go straight back to the ship because we didn't have a whole lot of time there, and like I said, we'd never been. And I wanted a piece of that key lime pie from the place where it was invented. And Erik didn't try any, so he'll just have to take my word for it. That it was delicious. Definitely stop in and get some.
I'm not much of a sweets person, so,
But you got to do it.
I guess. I should have. But Hannah talked me into a nacho from Sloppy Joe's also, so that was pretty good. But we shouldn't have got any Sloppy Joe meat on it. It was still pretty good, but I'd stick with the original nacho.
And did we forget to mention that there were chickens all over the place?
Yeah, seriously, chickens everywhere. Red jungle fowl, domestic red jungle fowl for our checklists. Yeah, but they were everywhere. I'd read about chickens being let loose all over on Key West, but they were being let loose all over on Key West, but they were significantly more pervasive than I thought they would be. But I was hungry, so we hurried up and dropped off those bikes and went to go get that nacho.
And after lunch or dinner, we headed back to the ship and went up to the deck to await sunset when we were hoping to no nighthawks that night. But there were a lot of white-crowned pigeons flying over to another island, which we had no idea what it was looking at the map. But now we're checking Google Maps, and it looks like it was Mule Key, possibly.
Yeah, I think so. That looks like the direction they were headed. But these were the only adult pigeons that I even had a chance to try to take a picture of, and so I did, and they were terrible, terrible pictures. But you could see the white crown on a couple of them, so that was, I guess, diagnostic.
Oh, and we didn't even mention the couple pelagics that we saw heading towards the island. What did we end up seeing?
City terns, right?
We saw a handful of city terns.
Yeah, there's a handful of city terns out there.
Feeding. And then 2 great egrets that were just flying right over the water. And we were still a couple miles out to sea.
Quite a few miles out to sea, I think. Like the little map on the cruise had us... We had to have been at least like 15 miles out.
I don't think we couldn't see land from
there.
No,
and there was 2 great egrets just flying right along.
I think they were flying to the Bahamas.
They must have been.
Yeah. Well, anyways, that was our Key West birding. The next day, we were to arrive in Cuba for our Cuban adventure.
Yeah, so Cuba was pretty cool. When we got into port, it was really entertaining for me. I mean, the pilot boat that was there, they were trying to get the mooring ropes over to the dock, and they were just cussing and screaming at each other. The guys on the ship, the guys down on the boat, everyone was just yelling. I think they were having some sort of communication issue with where the ropes are supposed to go, and it was
an engineer at heart because he's watching all that, and I'm looking at the Cuban martins that were the first lifers that we had gotten at Cuba because they were right at the pier as we were docking. They were flying all over the place, and I'm trying to figure out what they are. Erik's watching the pilot boat.
Yeah, but I was excited about the martins too, but I might as well enjoy the pilot boat while it's here.
But you've seen pilot boats before.
Well, I've seen martins too, and the Cuban martins pretty much looked identical to purple martins.
So you got your Cuban pilot boat.
Yeah, my Cuban pilot boat. There we go.
Okay, check that one off the list.
Well, after the excitement of the martins and the mooring ropes, we headed down to catch the bus for the tour that we'd booked.
And we were headed on an 11-hour excursion with Havana tours to go to the Vinales Valley to learn about tobacco farming and about the rural culture of Cuba.
Yeah, I guess we should mention that we choose to read a version like this rather than hiring a specific bird guide because there had been some changes in the OFAC requirements that the United States government has with travel to Cuba. And mostly because I'm overly cautious and had a hard time finding a lot of information on how to choose booking something with something other than the cruise, and the cruise had things that were guaranteed to fall within the allowable activities.
Yeah, because we have to keep a record of at least for 5 years of the activities that we did there in case we get audited somehow. I don't
know who's going to audit us.
It seems a little vague.
Yeah.
Anyways, I tried to get in contact with a few guide companies beforehand anyways, just to see what we could figure out. I had some trouble getting anybody to answer me, or they just weren't available to do a single day trip in the middle of the summer.
Yeah, so the OFAC requirement, not a brand new thing, but back in November 2017, President Trump removed a few of the options for travel to Cuba. As far as I understood, the visa that Americans traveling to Cuba, you can travel. There's a handful of things, but typically people travel under person-to-person cultural experiences. And there used to be both group and individual. And the change in November eliminated the individual person-to-person cultural experiences. So I'm not entirely sure on it. If some listeners know some better things, it sounds like without having the individual person-to-person, you can't just hire Joe Schmo bird guide through email. You have to hire a company that's vetted through the OFAC.
At least that's what we understand.
Yeah.
So even though we didn't book an excursion with a bird guide or one who specifically knew about birding, our guide from Havana Tours, his name was Lazaro. He was extremely knowledgeable about pretty much everything in Cuba. He had been a teacher for a long time. His English was fantastic. The tour with him was great. He was a little bit of a birder, which was a requirement with Havana Tours. They had to take a birding class and pass that to be a guide with them. So, it was pretty much a win-win. We got the cultural experience that was required of the excursion, and our guide was able to help us find a couple of birds while we were out at the national park.
Yeah, he had a lot to say on the 2-hour drive over to the Vinales Valley.
Yeah, he pretty much talked the whole time.
Yeah, that was 2 hours there, 2 hours back of nonstop information.
Not bad at all.
No. It was fantastic. Yeah.
And we specifically selected the Vinales tour because we thought we'd have the greatest chance of seeing some nature on that tour and the highest potential of seeing birds.
Yeah. So the Vinales Valley is a UNESCO Heritage Site, which that immediately piqued our interest. But the UNESCO site gives a description of a karst landscape, limestone outcroppings called magotes. The valley has fertile soil, which is the whole reason why they grow so much tobacco down in that area. And then it's used for crops and raising livestock. And the agriculture that's done in the area is primarily done through traditional methods.
Which means ox and plow, which we saw a lot of.
Yeah, a lot of animal labor to do all the different tasks.
Yeah. Big change. Before even leaving the city of Havana, however, on that drive where we were driving through town a little bit, we got a tiny glimpse of another Cuban specialty. It was a Cuban emerald.
Yeah, that was exciting.
I wasn't quite sure we were...
Yeah, that was exciting.
I wasn't quite sure we were going to see one. It's a medium to largish endemic hummingbird, and it was just sitting on the power line in the middle of a residential district, just like it was a ruby-throated.
Yeah, just chilling out.
Yeah. Not like it's special or anything.
Not like it's an endemic that we've never seen.
I know. Like, doesn't it know that?
Yeah, so anyways, on the drive, we got about 3/4 of the way out there, and we had a pit stop to use the restroom. Everyone got to get out and stretch their legs a little bit. Well, actually, before that, right before we got to the pit stop, Hannah was that an Annie? She just looked out of the window, or an Ani.
An Ani.
Yeah, Hannah pointed out a smooth-billed Ani, and I missed the first one we saw, but as luck would have it, I stared out the window for like 5 more minutes, just nonstop, and then another one went by. So essentially, we had 2 smooth-billed Anis, but she didn't see the second one, so it was kind of a...
We each saw one.
Yeah, we each saw one. Yeah, we each saw one. They were different ones. But once we got to that rest stop, Hannah and I used that time to kind of do a little bit of birding while we're walking around. A bunch of Antillean palm swifts, another lifer for us, flying around the rest stop, just trying to catch all the bugs out there.
Yeah, but we never got a good enough look to determine what those ones were.
Yeah, there was a handful of different kingbirds that are pretty common in that area.
Yeah. We got back on the road after that short stop and headed onwards to the valley. On the drive, we spotted a couple lifers like Cuban blackhawk, Cuban blackbirds, and greater Antillean grackles. And we also saw some common things too, like black-necked stilts, and then there are a lot of American kestrels. I was surprised, since we don't usually have those in the south, really, during the summer. They go north. So... know why they're in Cuba.
Yeah. I don't know if I've ever mentioned it before on this, but I get motion sick pretty bad. So
I get sick when there's bad smells.
Yeah, so the road, once we left the main highway and we were starting to head into the up into the valley, it was pretty windy and it was pretty rough for me. I basically had my eyes closed for about half of that, so I didn't get to enjoy a lot of the view.
And I don't get motion sick. Like I
Lucky
said,
you.
just I get sick from bad smells. So I was able to enjoy the drive a bit more. It was absolutely beautiful. Lots of small farming operations of rice and corn. There were rolling hills, just sections that were just gorgeous. I couldn't think of anywhere else that I've driven that's quite like it. Almost like driving through, Central California with those rolling hills, but not nearly as high.
I guess so, but there were also the big cliffs, like the big limestone cliffs and stuff.
I'm talking about before that, before we got to the mountain.
Oh, I see.
Just rolling landscapes. Yeah. It was gorgeous. Just grassy as far as the eye could see. Vinales, it's just on the other side of a plateau or a mountain from Havana. I don't know. We crossed a really high peak, but it wasn't quite like a mountain. It was just like a giant hill. I don't know. We went high up and then we came back down, and there was the town of Vinales. Our bus dropped us off at a museum. The guide gave us a tour discussing the history of the area. He included natural and cultural, just gave us some insight into the state of Pinar del Rio, so everyone could go tour the town by themselves for a little bit, which we decided not to do. We decided to barrage our guide with questions.
Yeah, because he had mentioned something about birding a little bit, and so we thought this is a great opportunity to just like corner him and figure out what he knows. So we were standing there talking to him, kind of got excited. He asked us what book we're using. We told him it was the Birds of Cuba book that we have, and he got pretty excited about that because that's the book he uses for his field guide. So he started going on about a couple different birds, and one that he got pretty excited to tell us about was the Cuban solitaire, which he thought we'd have a pretty good chance at seeing at one of our stops a little later.
Yeah, and that's an endemic, and it wasn't really even on our radar when we were looking at the birds that we might see.
It's not colorful or anything, so.
And I figured, going on this trip, there wouldn't be a whole ton of birds that we'd see, but more than anything, we would just get an idea where we want to come back to and how we can make the most of our Cuba exclusive trip. And the Vinales Valley is definitely a place we need to return to.
Oh, yeah.
It was absolutely gorgeous. The little town that we were in, I assume that town was called Vinales.
Yeah, Vinales.
Yeah, it was tiny, but there were signs all over the hotels and the restaurants saying TripAdvisor recommended, Lonely Planet. So, and there were a lot of tourists there too from, I think, mostly Europeans.
Oh yeah, definitely Europeans.
But, I mean, it's being visited by people.
Yeah, just not Americans.
No, not yet.
So our next stop was just right up the road from there. We probably could have walked.
We should have walked.
He should have just had us walk, but it wasn't that far away. It was this little small tobacco farm where they showed us how they dry the leaves. They had the big drying barn, and then how they choose the tobacco leaf. He actually just picked a whole bunch of leaves out of his bag and rolled up a cigar to show us how it all works. And then we bought a couple and left with a bundle of cigars.
Yeah, we got those. And I feel so stupid because I didn't know that a cigar is solely made of tobacco leaves. I thought it was like a cigarette where it has paper and, how that whole experience works. And to watch him do it from somebody who, that's what he does.
Oh, and he was a master at his craft. It was just, his hands were just moving like water. It was crazy.
Yeah. Not that we really smoke at all, but it was interesting. It was very...
Definitely interesting.
Cultural experience. So after that...
Definitely interesting.
Cultural experience. So after that, we headed off to lunch at an outside restaurant. And if you've ever been on a tour like this, we went on a tour to Belize, I think, where we had the same experience. And when we were in Malaysia, it was the same experience. They sit you down. Malaysia, it was the same experience. They sit you down at a restaurant. Your whole group is the only people. You're the only people at this long table in a restaurant, and it's just a tour guide or tour group, and they bring you food and more food, and it's giving you a cultural experience. And so that's it. So if you've ever been on a tour like that, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, they feel kind of awkward, but
a little bit.
Yeah, but it was really good food, even if it was a little awkward. It was lots of fresh fruit and veggies. There was beans and rice and some chicken.
Pork. It was
Was it pork?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm pretty sure it was pork.
It was delicious. That a little band with
They had like a guitar and
yeah.
They had and a flute.
There was a flute. That's what I was trying to think of. There was a weird instrument. It was a flute, which I never thought of Cuban music as having a flute.
It was like rock flute.
Yeah. Yeah, they played a little bit of music, and they even played Despacito.
I know. And it was in Spanish.
Yeah, of course.
The area where the restaurant was in was part of the karst area that had the landscape and the geological forms that make this the UNESCO World Heritage Site. And that's why they made it that, because of that's why they made it that, because of this gorgeous landscape with the tall limestone walls that are just absolutely dripping with vegetation.
Yeah, and so after we finished at that nice little lunch there, we headed over to this cave that discotheque in there. They have like strobe lights and stuff, and it's just like this party thing. And it's just a cave in the side of the limestone mountain. But we stopped there so we could get up close and take a look at the actual limestone itself and see what that looks like. But while we were there, a West Indian woodpecker just whoosh, right past. And it wasn't a Cuban green.
No, it was good enough to identify.
It was a West Indian woodpecker, so not an endemic, but still exciting. But then we got a pretty good look there at loggerhead kingbird. So finally able to identify one of the kingbirds pretty well.
And lastly, after that, we got back on the bus and we headed on over to the Monument de la Prehistoria, which I don't speak Spanish, so it's not as pretty. Do you know how to say it better?
I'm terrible.
You can't roll your R's?
I can't do anything very
Me neither.
well.
Which was a massive mural painted on the side of a huge limestone cliff rock face that describes the history of nature versus man, which I feel so bad that the tour guide was going on and on about it. He was telling us everything, but I was too focused on trying to figure out birds.
Yeah, we were staring up at the swallows that were flying over and the swifts, and
we were hoping that was something different.
Yeah, and there was, I think there was a northern mockingbird at that stop too.
Yeah, there was, and we were trying to figure out in Bahama.
Yeah,
northern. And so we walked up to the base of the cliff, and our guide was telling us all about it, and then he gave us some time to walk around and explore it by ourselves, and suddenly he put his hand up to his ear to indicate he had heard something. He yelled across the field at us to say, oh my gosh, there's something calling, and it was the Cuban solitaire was calling.
Oh yeah, and I got so excited to find another endemic. I just ran straight over to the forest edge, right where the call was coming from, just to see if I could see something. I wasn't able to see anything, so I whipped my phone out, my recording app. Can't remember what it's called. My recording app, and I actually got a pretty good recording, which that was fantastic. I guess here's a little snippet. But anyways, by this point in the trip, I had realized that I'd been carrying this camera around that we have the entire time, and I'd only taken like 5 pictures the whole time we were in Cuba.
You guys, I trusted him to get pictures of the landscapes and to tell you all about, and we were experiencing so we could share this with you. But I guess I learned a lesson that I should carry the camera next time.
Yeah, I guess Erik fails again. Oh well. But anyways, the mural was basically our last stop, and we loaded up to head back to the ship.
And we were exhausted anyways. Erik and I both fell asleep for a little bit on the drive back.
Yeah, and once we got all the way back to the ship after our little nap on the bus, we did a little bit of exploring around Havana's Old Town. I'm pretty sure that we forgot to mention about the cars in Cuba. That there was a law that didn't allow any citizen to own a vehicle that was newer than 1960, and so every owner had to get a permit to even buy the car in the first place. So you had to go to the government, get a license, and go to the government and get a permit to be regulated. But because of the regulations on the cars, that means that every single car there, or pretty much every single car there, is classic and from the 1950s and earlier. And the only exception really is like government-owned vehicles, like the tour buses and the vans and like the emissary vehicles and stuff. Those like that. Those are newer, like brand new vehicles. But pretty much anything a citizen owns is a classic car. Yeah,
and they're all nicely kept up too. I mean, I have a car that's newer than that, and it's not nearly as nicely kept up as theirs were. They were like fresh paint. It's hot. Yeah. But the seats look good in them. Like, they spend a lot of time, money, I don't know, just effort.
They care a lot.
Yeah, they care about their cars.
They care a lot more about their cars than we care about our cars.
Well, that's because they're so valuable to them. Yeah. And our tour guide was saying that there's so many people that never own cars because they're too difficult to get. And so it's a lot of like hitchhiking to get around the countryside. We had to end up picking up we ended up picking up a guy on the bus at one point. A bus tour operator, so it wasn't just a random guy. But help him get home because away from town. Yeah, it was like another half hour from where we picked him up. So yeah. if he was walking, that would be the rest of the day. Right. But anyways, like Erik said, it's really interesting to see how nicely they take care of their cars, and it's just, a blast into the past looking at all of those things. Yeah, cool. And like Hannah said, they were all clean. They all had fresh coats of paint on them, even the ones outside of the city. When we were driving through the countryside, there'd be like a shack that barely looks like somebody lives there, but there'd be a car next to it that looks brand new. Oh yeah, it would be a 1950s, but looks brand new. Yeah, it was crazy. It was weird. So the last thing for the day that we were hoping to see, after we'd walked around Old Town, it started to get dark, so we headed up to the ship and got dinner. Third dinner, I don't know. We just ate. There was a lot of eating, but we're hoping to see the Antillean Nighthawk still, because we're still within his range, overlooking the city, but nothing. It eluded us again. Bummer. Oh well. All in all, it was a great trip. I definitely want to go back and explore more of Cuba. It's way bigger than I thought it was, so there's a lot more to see. And also get some of those birds that we skipped out on. That prehistorium mural had some great hiking, it looked like, too, that I'd like to go back and do some point. Oh yeah, there were some people that were hiking way up on the top of that thing. They were on top, and that thing was like, what, 200 feet high? It was tall. It was big. It was big, and they had hiked all the way around it somehow. They did it quick too, because I saw it in 20 minutes. Oh, that's steep then. Oh, yeah. Maybe we'll rappel. Yeah. So, we wanted to also share some tips and tricks about visiting Cuba that may be useful if you're looking to go. So we went with Norwegian Cruise Line, which is great. I think it's the only cruise going there right now. Go on it, booze, and it's generally a pretty good time. Yeah, it was pretty good. The food was good. The alcohol was good. Erik had so many Bloody Marys. Yeah, and I didn't know I liked them, but apparently I do. he found that out. Yeah. So there's a well-known birding guide in Cuba. His name is Arturo Kirkconnell. He actually wrote the field guide that we brought with us, to the Cuban birds that we brought. So we were hoping to be able to guide with him. That was one of the guides that we tried to contact, but he was unavailable during this visit.
But I would recommend trying to contact him, Arturo Kirkconnell.
Yeah, if he can't guide you, he was recommending other folks that might be able to take us, and he'd be great at, I'm sure, recommending locations.
Oh yeah.
We haven't talked to him prior to doing this podcast, so I'm not sure what he's willing to do.
I guess that's true. We shouldn't promise him to anything.
Yeah, but
we don't know.
It's at least worth an email, I think. Very nice guy too. Exchanging money. Get euros or Canadian money. There's a huge exchange fee for US cash. I think they said it was 13%. Erik read 15% exchange fee. So if you go in there with $100, you're going to come out with like 80, 87, 85 kooks. So you're going to come out with like 80, 87, 85 kooks, which Cuban, I can't remember what kook stands for.
I'm
Cuban
not sure.
something currency. But it's much lower for euros and Canadian money. So that's what we ended up doing, was getting euros and exchanging it there. And we really didn't even need to collect foreign currency. So just keep that in mind. I would exchange it into euros or Canadian money.
Yeah, and another thing, we took 2 different field guides with us, and we actually used both of them. We ordered the field guide to the birds of Cuba by Orlando H. Garrido and Arturo Kirkconnell, the guy that we talked about just now.
We had already had the
prior
birds
to
of
the trip. We
West
had already
Indies.
had the birds of the West Indies, which it's a Princeton field guide. Both were very useful.
Yeah, they're both great books. Keep in mind the cultures and learn about theirs. We're really not old enough to know much about, the embargoes that's been going on with Cuba, the Bay of Pigs, and all those other events that were high tension between our 2 countries, other than what we've learned in history class. And as millennial Americans, we really have a charmed life. So when our guides started talking about their rations and how you go to the grocery store at the beginning of the month and you pick up your rations, and sometimes you have to supplement it with, food purchases, that really hit me about how other parts of the world lived. I've never experienced that before. I've never talked to anybody that has to live that way before. That was just super eye-opening.
Yeah, it's a whole different culture. Yeah, and in addition to that whole section of culture, something that is often in other countries around the world is make sure to bring some toilet paper, and also be ready. There's usually a bathroom attendant standing outside the door. Sometimes they have toilet paper that you can buy from them. Sometimes they just charge you because they're quote unquote working as a bathroom attendant. They'll clean the bathrooms occasionally, and I guess they're keeping them safe, or just making money off of them. I'm not sure, but they're there safe, or just making money off of them. I'm not sure, but they're there all the time.
Well, and also something I think our tour guide mentioned, or maybe they mentioned it on the ship before we got off, was that not all bathrooms are going to have toilets. So if you haven't traveled to maybe Asia before, you might not have experienced it, but
that's like a squatting toilet?
Yeah, squatting toilet. That's what they said. So if you haven't experienced one of those before, just keep that in mind, that you might see one of those. We didn't. But, work on your thigh muscles.
Yeah.
Yeah. And please don't be afraid to go to Cuba. It's a gorgeous country. It's a lot like going to Mexico. It's a lot like going to Mexico. And, well, I mean, it's right next to Mexico. And for wildlife... And for wildlife viewers like us, it can make a huge impact if we go. I know I've preached about this before, but the more wildlife viewers go and impact their economy, the more willing they will be to improve habitat and make it easier for others to go. And, we're going to go watch wildlife. And, who can hate that?
Yeah. Who doesn't like the wildlife?
Who doesn't like the wildlife? But it's such a cool experience. And, yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm glad we went.
Definitely.
So thank you all for listening to our podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you learned something. Please rate, review, and subscribe. Nobody's done that yet except for me. So please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher. If you have any other questions about our Cuban trip, please post them on our Facebook, our Instagram. Our Facebook is Hannah and Erik Go Birding. Our Instagram is Hannah Goes Birding. Or you can email us at hannahhanderikgobirding@gmail.com. You can tell us what you hated, what you liked. We want to post some of this information that we talked about on our show notes. So check those out. And yeah, like I said, we had a great time and we're glad we can share this with you. And please share us with your friends and help us grow.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.